as a luthier, a very, very common request or a job or commission or work or whatever that you're going to end up getting is being able to make a neck that matches another neck. Trying to make it feel, look, everything just like the old neck. Sometimes, and this is the most common time that you're going to be doing it, is you're going to have a neck that ends up becoming broken. This is usually also on vintage instruments. On a lot of vintage instruments, they're not all consistent. So you can't assume just because, you know, the neck on this particular guitar, same year, same whatever, is going to feel or look and be just like this other neck that was on, you know, this guitar. And what I have here is an old Gibson neck. This is one that I had already built a new neck for, so I don't really need another one right now. But I do get requests occasionally where somebody says, hey, do you have a replacement neck for this year, Les Paul or whatever? You know, if you've got the wood, you got the time. There's nothing wrong with building an extra neck. So how do we go about blueprinting it? We have to be able to make sure that, you know, we end up making this new neck where it's like identical in every way. Many times after you look on the back of it, you'll see that it's actually made of numerous pieces of wood. And then you'll have to measure those and, you know, glue them all together so that way, once again, it matches the original. Now, this was done during a year when they were basically just trying to save as much money as they could. There was a lot of laminations and stuff like that. So I'm not going to be building this neck exactly the way that this was built, because it would reduce the value of the neck. Instead, we'll end up building it like this year of a Gibson neck. And so we'll have one that goes down the middle, solid piece, and we'll have a couple little pieces, ears, they might call them, on the edge to finish the headstock off. Now the shape of it and everything is pretty much going to be very similar between the two, but the way that this is going to end up being put together is a little different. If we turn this over, we would end up seeing that there is a seam right here and one right here of where they had 3 pieces of wood, possibly 4, glued together in order to make the neck. One of the very first things you have to do is you have to look at the neck and see how was it made. Is it laminated? If so, how many pieces of wood? Another thing that you have to look at is the grain. Is it flat sawn? Is it rift sawn? Is it quarter sawn? You know, what's going on with the grain pattern. Typically when you end up seeing a lot of laminations like this particular neck, they're not real overly concerned with the grain pattern. It's just glue them together, make a neck, call it good, let's get out of here. When you start seeing necks that are more like this, you start seeing they do care that this has a very particular grain pattern. So right here I have a piece of mahogany, and this is what I'm going to be using to make the new neck. You need to know what species of wood the neck is made out of as well. Generally, you're only going to be dealing with 2, and that's mahogany, Honduras mahogany, or American mahogany, or genuine mahogany, all the same thing. Or it's going to end up being maple. Sometimes it's a soft maple, sometimes it's a hard maple, but it's usually one of those 2. It's either going to be mahogany or maple. Before we can really do anything, we need to make sure that this piece of wood right here is actually shaped in a way that we can use it. Right now this has been rough sawn, and you could tell that it has been ripped to the size that it needed to be ripped to, and so there's like some fuzzy areas here. It's fuzzy up here, it's not flat, it's not straight. Running through the bandsaw, same thing. So I'm going to end up taking this and I'm going to run this through my joiner, and I want every side to be perfectly square. If you have a planer, you can use a planer, but I want every side to be perfectly flat, and I want every angle to be perfectly square. Because I'm going to be building a neck like this one right here, in this particular style of the gluing pattern, I'm going to measure from here to here, where those 2 seams are, and I'm going to get a measurement, and I'm going to also mill this down until it is exactly this measurement here. Okay, so I went ahead and I ran this through the joiner and the planer, so now we have a nice square piece of wood. And if we look at the end of this, you're going to notice that the grain is kind of going like this. So this is close to what would be known as a rift sawn, which is generally it's at an angle like this. If it was straight up and down like this, we could say it's quarter sawn. Okay, if we held it this way, we could also say that that would be flat sawn though, depending on the angle that we were at. But generally, flat sawn would be kind of like, the rings would be kind of like this. Okay, cruising up. If we were to focus just about right here, that's pretty close to being quarter sawn. It's not exact, but it's getting close. If we were to come over here, that would not be so much when it comes to quarter sawn. If we come over here, let's look at this end, you're going to see that we're going to be dealing pretty much with the same thing. If we go this way, this is much closer to quarter sawn down here. Okay, so this is the side right here that we're going to be kind of focusing on. The side that looks like it's got, or the closest to quarter sawn, is what's facing us here on top. Okay, and also by looking at the grain, we can kind of tell what's going on with this grain. You know, how close is it to quarter sawn? We can see that the grain is kind of going off a little bit at an angle like that. That's okay. It's okay. The very first thing we need to do is we need to figure out length. Okay, so we'll take this, we'll just kind of put this here, kind of give ourselves a generic length here, measure from one end to the other. Okay. When we see things like this where it's cracking, we have to kind of avoid this, okay? The good news is this has a back angle to the neck, so if this is going to be where the fretboard sets, this shoots back and we'll miss it. And you kind of have to think about the neck in the piece of wood even before you start making it. You know, are you going to be able to dodge things like this? You know, are you going to be able to dodge things like this? In this particular case, yes, on both accounts. So now what we have to do is we need to come up with a measurement for basically our fretboard, our scale length, right? And if we look at what was here, we'll see that right about here, where my thumbnail is where the fretboard starts. Then we end up having about a little less than a 1/4 inch here. That's where the nut rests. From here over is going to end up being the headstock. Okay? So if we take this, we kind of put it together the best that we can, and we take a measurement from point A to point B. You're going to end up seeing that we're going to need about 7.5 inches, okay, to be safe. 7.5. I'm going to give myself a little bit more than 7.5 just because I want to make sure that I dodge certain things that are happening over on this end. So I'm going to give myself 8. Okay, so that is going to be our first number. I have squared this all up on the planer and the joiner. This first line will represent where the fretboard stops. Okay, the nut would be right here, okay, but this is where the fretboard stops. It essentially represents from here back, okay, and I gave myself some extra. And keep in mind, the headstock has a back angle to it, so you have to make sure that you don't give yourself too much, but you also want to make sure you don't cut it too short. Once again, blemishes like this, areas where we end up having cracks like this, we're avoiding those, okay? Because of the back angle of this headstock, we're going to miss those, okay? We need to get a measurement from the fretboard, where it begins, all the way to the end of the neck. And we give ourselves a little bit more. In this particular case, I'm going to go 18.5, and I'm going to burn an inch, just so that way I can stay a little bit more accurate. And burning an inch basically means I'm going to start on the 1, not down over here. So 18.5, which basically means 19.5 actually down here. Okay. Now between these two lines is our working area. Okay. Everything from here to here is working area. Everything from here to here is working area. Anything from this line that way, we don't care about. We don't even worry about it. We have to get a measurement of the width of the nut. Okay, so we'll use a set of calipers, and we'll come in here and we'll do just that. So right where that sets, we take a number, we check it out, and we transfer it. But we're going to have to center. We have to have a center line on this. Now this particular piece of wood, I had cut it 2 1/8. Okay, so that would basically be 1 1/16 would be our center. 1 1/16. We're also going to need this center line for our truss rod location. And all the things that I'm doing here, you can actually do on a piece of MDF and make a template first. If you're going to be making a bunch of replica necks, okay? So this is our center. So let's come over here with our calipers, 110. Yeah, see, this is off a little bit. 110. So let me bring this in just a little bit, about right there. And that's about right. You only get one shot at this, so make sure that when you mark your center line, it really is center. And we know that this is definitely where the nut is going to end and the fretboard begins. You can also take this and move it like this just to make sure that you really are truly square. So we're going to take our calipers, measure once again. We're there. Now we need to figure out what the width of the nut is going to be. You know, what is that? And in this particular case, I know it's 1 5/8". Now we can't just get 1 5/8" and go like this and kind of guess what it is. We're going to end up having to basically look at, in this case, I'm going to switch it over to millimeters, 41.2. So we know that that's going to be 20 and 20. 0.5, because that would give us the 41, and then we have the 0.2, so that should be a 1. This particular set of calipers doesn't do the 1, so we're just going to end up doing the 5. Come over here, make a line. So this is what I'm going to end up doing on this one, is I'm going to take a measurement from the outside, because I know it's square, to the first line. I'm going to do the same thing here. Okay, I see that this one doesn't match up. This one actually needs to be about there, okay, in order for these two lines now to match up. And now we got 41.3. That is actually close enough for what we need to do, because simply just by going just a hair on the outside with the ruler, we can make up for that distance, which is barely any. With this particular scale length, I'm going to be taking a measurement here, and this measurement is from the beginning of the fretboard to the 12th fret, and that is 12 and 5/16. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That right here, this location, is center of the 12th fret, and I know that because I have the fretboard and I was able to measure that. Okay. Now the reason why I'm doing this is because this is going to end up helping me make sure that I'm staying on track. After I'm done with this, I should be able to take the old fretboard and just lay it on there and it should fit perfect. And I want to make sure that I've got a couple of reference areas instead of just this and then one at the end, which we're going to be doing the one at the end right now. What we want now is we want to take a measurement from here, okay, beginning of the fretboard, and we want to take it to here, okay, right where this ends up hitting the body. So if we take our tape measure, we burn 1 inch, okay, so that way it's a little bit more accurate. So by doing this, I am getting 15 7/8. We'll throw up our ruler here, and 15 7/8 we will mark right down over here. So we'll come over here and we will make that line. So this is basically where this would end up hitting the body, and now we know that this is also square. Okay, so now what we have to do is from here to the actual end of the neck, and I am getting 19 and like 3/8 heavy, which is basically 7/16. Okay, so 19 7/16. That's what I'm getting. Now we can make another line right here. Okay, for the end of the neck. So far so good. If it starts getting confusing on all of these lines on which one goes where and what's this, you know, you can write down, it's kind of like edge, you know, so we know where it is, you know, or right here, end. So that way we know this right here, fret. Okay. Now we have to also get the distance from here to here, okay, at that location. So we can take this once again and get our calipers. We're getting 54.5, and 54.5 is 2 1/8, okay, which would make perfect sense because that's what we have up here as far as the headstock when we end up measuring chum chum. right here, okay? So that would make sense. So from here to here we can make our line, okay? And then this is basically where our fretboard is going to be sitting. And this is actually also what we are going to be cutting out on the bandsaw. Okay, so, and I'm going to give myself just a hair more because of the nut not quite being exactly the 1 5/8. It's very close, but it's not quite. Okay, so we got that one, and of course we'll have this one. We also need to make sure that we can put the location of where the truss rod is going to end up being. So once again, we can take a look at this neck and we can measure from the beginning of the nut down over here, take our measurement and mark that right there. So right here is that location. We also have to take a measurement for where it actually sets in the slot right here. And you want to take the larger of them. Now this particular one is not in the greatest condition, so this is not going to be very accurate right here. But it's saying about 37.4. If you have the guitar body, you want to take a measurement of that, so that way you can make this fit really nice and tight. So 37.4, same thing. We need to find center and draw our 2 lines. Now I have the body here, so I was able to take a measurement, and you'll notice right here at 38.2, that's the difference, right? So it's important that you have that number. You know what the neck pocket is going to be. So in this particular case, it's going to be 19.1, okay? And same scenario, find center, make your line. And it's better to go a little large than a little small, because you can always sand some stuff off or shave it later so it fits nice and tight, but you don't want to have to add anything to get it to fit, so keep that in mind. So we have our 2 lines right here, and you probably can't see them because, you know, I am using a pencil, but it's matching up. So far so good, okay? Let's go ahead and redefine our lines here just to make sure that there is no error on any of these things. When it comes time to cutting this, you do not want to be sitting there going, oh, I'm having a hard time seeing it, where you start guessing where you're supposed to cut it instead of cutting it where it actually needs to be cut. So now that we have that, we have this width, we have it tapering to the nut, we're not going to worry about the headstock yet. Okay, the headstock we can work on a little bit later on down the line. There's more important things for us to focus on other than the curve right here. We can simply just cut this straight at this location and call it good if we want to, and then later on just try to redefine that headstock. So now let's take this, let's give ourselves a mark on all of the important locations, like right there, right here on the end. So the important locations we're going to mark, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring these lines down like that. So now we've got our 3 lines that we have carried over onto the side, and that's important. We need that. What we need to do is figure out the thickness of the nut, and in this case it looks like it's going to end up being 3/16. Okay. If somebody says, oh, could you make it a little bit bigger, I like a thicker nut, then that's when you would do that. Okay. And you know, if what we were doing right here was like a fender neck, it would be just so much easier. But I figured in a video like this, do a really hard neck. And if you can do this, you can do any of the other necks that are out there. Now this location is very important because this is the beginning of the back angle of the neck, and we need to figure out what that back angle is. So you're going to end up needing some type of gauge that can pick up on the angles. Okay, but what we can do is we can take this, lay it across the top, and then just kind of shift this until that angle is right and it sits on there. So by starting right here, this essentially is basically saying that this is what that angle is. Okay. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and define exactly that angle right here. Okay. We have to get the thickness of the headstock as well. Okay. Generally these are right around a 1/2 inch. Okay. So if we say it's 0.58 and that's a little loose, I'm going to give it a 0.56. Give ourselves that secondary line. Now, what is the length of this? If we were to take this and we were to set it here, what is the length of it? At this point, if you wanted to actually glue this together, it would actually make your job a little bit easier. Okay, because if not, you're going to end up having to set this up here like this and whatnot. Making sure that this is flat in order to make sure that the angles are correct and the distance is correct and all that other good stuff. Now, how I'm going to do it is I'm going to go by, once again, the end of the nut and come to the end over here, and I'm basically getting about a 7 1/8. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give myself actually a little bit more than that. So basically there, I'm going to give myself, because this I can always take off later, okay? So I'm not going to sweat that. But I also want to try to maximize the amount of stuff I can get out of this particular piece of wood here. Here we have to take some measurements. If you have a neck that has a fretboard, that is so much better, because you can say at the 3rd fret, when I measure from here to here at the 3rd fret, this is what I get. At the 12th fret, when I'm measuring from here to here, this is what I'm getting. And then that's what we need to do. We need to get a measurement of at least 3 at different locations. And if you don't have frets or anything along those lines, you could line it up essentially kind of like this, get it close to where everything is supposed to be on the measurements, and then just kind of go by that. But use calipers, make sure it's flat against the top where the fretboard sits, and get a number. And we need to have a few of them so we know what kind of back angle this neck profile is going to have. Okay, so at the nut, I'm having a 0.62, so essentially 5/8. Okay, right there. At this edge side right here, it's actually right around 1 1/4 inches thick. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and go 1 1/4 inches, 1 1/4 inches. Now this neck right here has an angle where it sets against the body because this has a back angle on it. So we have to figure out what that is, and once again we'll use our angle tool here, being very careful with it. And getting that angle right there. What is the distance from here to here? We have to get that. Basically 0.58 inches. I'm going to give myself actually a little bit more, because I can always sand that down. What we can do here, let's just say if we don't have the fretboard, is we can take this and say, well, when does this curve actually kind of stop? And we can come over here and take a measurement, and we get close to it. We'll just say like 1.9 inches. Okay, so we could do this. We could say 1.9 inches roughly here, and this is where 1.9 inches. What we can do is we can make a line here, come over now, and take a measurement, 8.2, and then so at that point, so at this point right here, we can say 8.2, right there. Okay, and that's a way that we can get that number as well, because we have a reference to it. So now that we have a reference, I can take this and draw a line from there to there. And you can give yourself a little bit more, just so that way there's room for error. Okay, but we can basically go like this, and now we have a line. We have to give ourselves that curve. Once again, we can set this here, and then go ahead and just kind of draw this curve. So we have our curve here, and we can kind of refine it by hand. Okay, so now we're doing pretty good, because now we have our We have our line here. We have this our neck pocket where it's going to be sitting in the neck pocket. We have the angle, so the back angle is there. We end up having our curve. We end up having our neck profile thickness here. We end up having it shoot over this direction, so we can kind of just have this continue this way until it meets that. This shoots over this direction. Okay, so at this point we can take this to the bandsaw and we can cut this out. Okay, and we want to leave a little bit of space there, right? Always room for error. Don't try to cut it exact. You want some room for error, just in case you made a mistake, right? It's like the old saying goes, measure twice, cut once. But I can comfortably take this to the bandsaw now and cut it out with confidence, and then we can continue doing what we started. And so I'm going to cut on the bandsaw this side first. Okay, I'm going to cut all this out, and then I'm going to hold this up, and I can cut out this portion too if I want. And I cut a couple of pieces off. I'm going to glue them to the sides here, so that way we have the full size headstock. When gluing the ears here, just using a regular wood glue, you can use tight bond as well. Some manufacturers will use epoxy, but in this case I think it's better just to use things like tight bond, just like a regular wood glue. And I was just using scrap mahogany from when I cut this main board out. We can take this to the bandsaw, cut off extra right here if we want to. The rest of this, we can also cut off any extra here on the bandsaw. And if you wanted to make this a little bit more accurate during the time that you were gluing it, you could. But remember, this face right here has only been rough cut as well. Okay, so we're just trying to get a rough shape and the proper amount. We can measure the width of the widest part. In this particular case, it looks like we're getting real close to about 3.5 inches. So what we can do is come over here. We know that this is 2 1/8. So we got 1 1/16 right here. And this is just a temporary center. This is going to end up being flattened. So 1 3/4 inches both ways will give us our 3.5. And you want to take as much meat off as you can, so it makes it a little easier when it's time to shape the headstock, that you're not having to remove a bunch of wood that quite honestly just isn't necessary for the headstock. So this portion on the outside on both sides, we don't really need that. Let me make sure, so I can take this to the bandsaw and cut this extra off too, make it where it's a little easier for me to work with this. So I removed a little bit extra on the sides here because we didn't really need it. The important thing is we have enough on both sides. Let's work on this angle right here, because this needs to be cut, and you can do it really with a jigsaw, but I find it's better to use something like a fine saw that you can have a little bit more control over. And what we can do is we can actually put a piece of wood here as a guide, so that way it is flat against an edge here, at least to get it started. Okay, something along those lines. And now that we have this started, we won't really need that block anymore. Many times in scenarios like this, I'll actually cut a little deeper than it needs to go. So when I cut down this way, I know for sure it's a nice sharp angle. And when I say a little deeper, I'm talking like a 1/28th, a 64th. You don't really want to go too much beyond it. Sometimes you'll find necks like this that have a back angle will also have a piece of wood right here that extends out, like right here. And it's just a real thin piece that would sit underneath the fretboard. So at this point I'm going to take this to the bandsaw and I'm going to cut here. I'm probably going to stop about right here, and then I'm going to finish off the rest of it with the fine saw. But I also want to cut this side too, kill two birds with one stone. To make sure that this line is actually where it's supposed to be, I can take my square and basically where this line ends, like that, make sure that it basically lines up with that line there, right? And it does. So that tells me that these are really in the same location. Once again, so trying to dial this in, what I've got is a straightened piece of mahogany here. It's clamped, and I'm holding the fine saw against it like this, and then I can just kind of move this back and forth, and it's just going to end up removing a sliver right next to the edge of the piece here. So same scenario here. I want to tie this corner to this corner basically like this, and one of the best ways to make sure that happens is if I were to put, once again, a block or something here to act as my fence, okay, something along these lines, making sure that the fine saw can't really go anywhere during the time that I'm starting this. So at this point, if you wanted to, you could start kind of rough testing the neck shape, you know, to see does it fit inside there, you know, how much do I have to shave off here, how much do I have to shave off here, you know, how's this back angle looking and stuff. So you can get this part dialed in before you continue with anything else. So at this point, I'm going to start trying to flatten this, getting it all squared up and everything, and getting this to where it actually sets in the body nice and tight. Now if you don't have the body around, you're going to have to go by measurements that you find on the internet, or just simply what's currently there on the neck, and it means there's probably going to be a little shaving or something that needs to be done before the neck goes into the body, or sometimes it's actually a little too small. When building replications of vintage necks and things, it really, you really should have the body that the neck is going to go into. When it's a set neck, you really should, even if it's a bolt-on, just to make sure, because you might go with a standard measurement and it's just simply not right, because there's too many variances. Now the way that I'm going to be flattening this is I'm going to be using a sander. You can use a file if you want to, a hand file. I'm going to be using a belt sander where I can set this flat on the table and let it just kind of flatten everything and make it nice and neat. It won't be able to get into here very well, but we should flatten this well enough. So I have a pretty good start here of this being flattened, but like I said, it's hard to get up in this area right here. So kind of have to come in here with a chisel or something a little bit later on to remove what the sander cut in, or of course use a file. Kind of use a file here to dial it in a little bit better. Almost as tight as maybe a jigsaw puzzle piece. We want a little room in there so we can get glue between the two. But that's pretty much the only amount of room that we need is enough for glue. If it's too tight when you try putting it in, it will end up actually like squeegeeing the glue off, and we don't really want that. And also if it gets too tight and you have glue there, it can actually create an air pocket, and you're pushing against it, and then this air will just kind of push up. So we want this to be tight, but we want it to where we can make sure that we can get some glue in the joint. Once again, this is really just the beginning of the rough-in. Okay, this is not the end result. This is the beginning of it, and we just need to make sure that everything is nice and neat. We want everything to fit inside the neck pocket, nice and neat, no gaps or anything like that against the body here, here, or here. And we want this to once again fit snug. So I've got this to fit in snugly this direction. But we got some things stopping us, which are right here. And then so this is something that we're going to end up having to take care of right here, down the rear of it. And everything that I'm doing, actually, you can use a router for and make it very, 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 very accurate and pretty looking. In this video, I'm trying to show you how you can kind of do it with just some basic tools. When we start doing the rest of the neck, there is a time we are going to be using a router, though, because it's really important how accurate that is. Now, I've done a rough transfer of the headstock right here, and I'm going to take this to the bandsaw and once again do a rough cut around it, leaving a little room for error. You might not be able to see what I'm doing because of my neck jig here, but I'm basically holding it down just like this and slowly taking the top down. And I've marked where the end of the nut is, so I know when to stop with the sanding. And there we go, and we stopped right there at the end of the nut. Now typically Gibsons will have like a veneer that will say their name and everything on there. It's not actually inlay, it's more like a sticker. So even if this was not like absolutely perfect or whatever, it's okay, because this would end up getting that little veneer and it would hide any imperfections. But now we have to find center again and mark out once again the headstock, which honestly is going to be a little hard because it's really hard to see where that seam is. It's right here. So this is where I can take my measurement. From here to 2 1/8 is where the other seam should be, and it is. So we're good. The center should be right here. So part of the video that I had recorded for this portion of the neck build was corrupt, and I was unable to show you that. So what I want to do is I want to show you on the whiteboard what I did. And this is creating the little channel that is for the truss rod access. So if we look at the neck, we'll say that this right up here is the headstock. We have to put in a channel right here so that way we can have access to the truss rod nut, right? So trying to put that in here, at least with an old Gibson type neck, would be very difficult. So what you end up doing is you get a piece of wood that basically looks like this, okay? And you can get another one back here, and then from here you'd clamp from this to this, okay? So you clamp these together. If you want to put a piece of double stick tape, you can, okay? But then at that point, what you end up doing is you take a Forstner bit, okay, which kind of looks like this, and then you start drilling downward. And when you start drilling down, now where I drew this isn't quite right, but when you start drilling down, okay, it allows you to have kind of like a channel where the thing won't slip, and you can drill it and stop it right there, and it'll give you that nice channel, okay? And that's how I did it. Just keep in mind this guy should be like about right here. But that's how I went about doing it on this particular neck. And if you look at the old Gibson necks, you're going to see that that's pretty much what they ended up doing. You can also do this if you have a long enough Forstner bit or an adapter. You can do it before you end up trimming the neck, okay, out of the blank. So you can say if this is going to be where the fretboard is and I need to have this much removed, the center of it should be about here, and then you just start drilling straight down. Make sure that that thing stays perfectly straight, and then you can do the same thing. So let's get back to the normal video. Okay, so now you can see I've got the headstock drawn out. I've got the channel inside there where I need it to be, and it stops at the depth and the location that it needs to stop at. And now I need to route in my truss rod channel, but we need to know what depth it is. So taking this broken neck is typically about 3/8 of an inch, and then what it does is it tapers toward the center to a thicker amount. Okay, but what we're going to do is we're going to pop out this this little wedge that's inside here. And obviously, if it breaks, it's okay because I mean the neck is broken. So right now we just need to get some decent numbers so that way we know the truss rod will feel the same and perform the same. So we can see that the channel goes pretty much all the way up here. Okay, so it's not like they drilled a small hole, then they did the channel. The channel goes all the way through, up into the slot, up into that rounded area. Now, if this was an actual truss rod repair, I wouldn't have been so brutal with it. What I would have done is I would have actually steamed that piece out, that shim. I would have steamed it in order to remove it, replace the truss rod, and then put it back in there. But this neck is broken. I just need to get some measurements. I want to get it done, you know, so no reason to be too nice to it. So now what we have to do is we have to get our measurements at different locations. So what we can do is this, is we're going to start up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start up here, put our ruler in, and I'm getting right around a 1/2 inch right here, okay? And I'm going to just start dragging this until I see that 1/2 inch change, and right about here the 1/2 inch changes. It starts getting deeper, but from here to over here is 1/2 inch. And interestingly enough, about right here to right here is a 1/2 inch. From here to here has a slight curve, but it only goes about a 1/16 more than a 1/2 inch, which plus 1/16. Okay, that's not a whole hell of a lot. The vast majority of it is right here. That's where the vast majority of the bend is. To kind of give you an idea, what we'll do is we'll put a piece of veneer here, and we'll put a mark on where the 1/2 inch part is. Okay, so as we start cruising down this way, you see it stays the same until it starts slowly changing. Right there is probably the deepest that it's going to get, and then it shoots back up. Let me see if I can hold this in such a way that you can actually see the line and how it's right there. It starts disappearing a little bit. Right there it's gone, and then it comes back again. We're dealing with a 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch. Most of this is 1/2 inch. So what we can do is just route this out a 1/2 inch all the way down. And what we'll do is then we will just kind of gently curve this in the last 1/16 of an inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, and against the edge of the table here, I'm going to clamp this down. So I've got this clamped at the edge of the table, and what I need to do is from here down to where the truss rod actually gets drilled in, I need to route a 1/4 inch channel 1/2 inch deep, because I have not trimmed the sides here. Okay, I have a guide. I have a guide here because this is 2 1/8 all the way down. So this, I can use this to help me guide my router. Another thing I could do if I wanted is I could take a table saw, turn this upside down on a table saw, run it through here, and just move it over just a little bit to get that. Of course, this is going to get in the way, so your fence would have to be very, very small. And in situations like this, you really want to use an upcut router bit. Okay, and then so when this spins, it's going to grab the wood and throw it up. A flute will work, but it has a tendency to jitter a lot. Upcuts are really the way to go. It makes a cleaner cut. It just goes a lot easier. And this is basically what we can be using here now. We've got this that's kind of in the way. That's no good. Okay, but essentially we could use something along these lines slide it back and forth, make sure that it's as even as we can get it. I'm going to show you a way that you can do it without guides and all that other stuff. And this is not my favorite way of doing this because it leaves a little room for error. But what we're going to do is we're going to mark 1/8 of an inch on both sides of the center. Draw a line up and down that. And we're going to be doing the same thing right here. We'll go ahead and clamp this back down. I only have it clamped on one side here. Now the secret to routing straight lines, okay, when you don't have a guide, A, it's never going to be perfectly straight, okay. B, you need to do it in very small increments so you have full control over the router. And you need to be able to see what the router bit is actually doing, okay. I have a CNC machine that I could actually clamp this in and have it all cut out and routed, everything all perfect. I could set this up on my router table and make a very, very thin fence and run it over the top. I could clamp this down, I could build a straight edge that's over here and use that as my fence for the router. There's a lot of things I could do. I'm gonna show you this way. It's not the most ideal, it's not perfect, but it'll get the job done. Okay, so you're going to want to keep the speed at a very low speed, and you're going to see that if you pull it, the router is going to want to either work with that pull or it's going to fight it. If you push it, it's either going to work with it or it's going to fight it, and it's going to want to go off in a certain direction. The only way that you're going to be able to control this is to go slow and very, very small increments. I have this set at 1. I don't want to go any more than that. And I got to go very slow in order to control this. So after the first pass is done, you'll see we only went down maybe a little bit more than a 1/16, almost an 1/8 maybe. We're going to have to do it again. Same amount, same pass. As you can see, it's not a perfect cut, but it's pretty close, and it's really the only way you're going to be able to do it freehand without using some type of guide. But after you get to a certain distance, you do want to take your measurements. You want to make sure that you are at the appropriate height. At this point, I honestly think that that's deep enough, and I don't really want to go much further than that. So we have that in all the way. You'll see that this is setting here at the level that it needs to set at. We just need now to build a little channel to go in. So that fits well. So now what we have to do is we need to, about right here, go just a little bit deeper, and then we need to make a channel. Then we need to make a shim that will fit inside this channel and glue it in. And the way that we can do this is with like a veneer. We can make end up like taping shims. Now we only need to go about a 1/16, right? It's not really a whole lot. So what we can do is actually take a piece of tape, and we'll put it down both sides, or just one large piece of tape, okay? Kind of like this. And then we'll put another one here, but then we'll stop about right here. Same thing, we'll stop about right here. And right here we'll put another one. We'll stop about right there. Okay. And what this essentially is going to end up doing is giving us that it's higher here, it starts getting gradually a little bit lower. And you do this until when you put your ruler back inside here, it ends up giving you really close to the same measurements. And then we'll just put one long one down this, like that, and we'll put one right like this. Then we just take a razor and cut out that if you want to. I gotta tell you, there's a lot better ways of doing this when you have all the proper tools. But a lot of times when I'm doing videos like this, people will say, I don't have all those fancy tools. Yeah, I know. So that's why I'm trying to show you how you can kind of do this with minimal stuff. If you already have all the fancy tools that you need to do it, you know which ones to use. You wouldn't need me to tell you. Okay, but at this point I think that that's probably good. I've got the height here, it cruises down, then it comes back up. Now I can set the router bit to about an extra 1/16 and run it through and give myself that slight curve. With the truss rod in, what we need to do is push down on it, and over here, see if we push down on it, if we get any movement, and we do, okay? And that's what we're looking for. So now what we have to do is we need to cut a piece of mahogany that will fit inside here, and we know that it's a 1/4 inch wide, and we need this to be essentially 17 3/4. Now I was lucky enough to find a piece of walnut, which is actually even better. Now if you want to use a piece of mahogany you can, but I went ahead and I ripped it at a 1/4 inch, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some glue on both sides, and I'm going to clamp it in, but what I'm going to do is right here I'm going to clamp it down even more because I want to put a slight bow in that piece of wood, so that way it gives me that arc, and then afterwards this will be sticking up. I can shave that off, and that essentially will give me that curve that we need to make this truss rod work. Keep in mind, you do not want to use a lot of glue because you do not want to glue the truss rod in place, and you want to pretty much put enough glue only down the side of this, and then when you hit it in, it'll scrape off the extra so it won't drip down, and we just need enough for it to stay in place, okay, because the fretboard is actually going to end up really doing a lot of the holding. It'll hold this in place, so we just need to put enough glue for this to stay in place, just enough for it to hold. That's all we need. Okay, and stick this in, and then we'll go ahead and kind of pound this in. We'll get it in there. If it's too tight, don't pound it because you might split the neck. Okay, it should be snug. Now after that's in there, we need to clamp it in, and remember we need to really focus on the area that is curved. That part is very important. So we need to put a lot more pressure here, okay, than on the other parts of the truss rod. This will put the curve in this thin piece of wood, okay. But it'll also end up putting the curve in the truss rod. Without the curve, the truss rod will not work. So now that we have this clamped, let's go ahead and let this set up. We'll shave the top off, and we should have a truss rod that is working. Okay, so we have got the piece back in. What I've done is I've taken a little bit of wood filler to fill up some of the small gaps that we have from the routing. Okay, now ordinarily if you had a guide, you wouldn't have anything like that. It would be super tight, but I want to make sure that I fill that up so that way later on when the fretboard goes on, none of the glue can seep inside there and attach itself to the truss rod. You don't want that. So we need to shave this off, and you can use a draw knife to bring that down. If you want to take a file to it, you can take a file to it, but you definitely want to get this down as far or as close as you can get it to the top of the neck portion. So I've got that cleaned up pretty good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and kind of just sand off some of this wood putty. Anywhere that I think that there might be a little glue that could drip down the side, I'm going to end up putting a little bit of wood putty. Okay, this is only for that purpose. I'm not doing it for any other reason. And as I had mentioned before, it's always better really to use some type of guide so there isn't a variance. Okay, and like I mentioned before, the only reason why I did it the way I did is just to show you you can do it. You can do it freehand, but you're going to get a little variance, as well as you have to do it in small increments. Anything that can reduce the level of adhesion from the glue that you're going to be putting on, you want to minimize that. Okay, especially if you have a fretboard that's very oily. Now, I'm not going to really be able to test this truss rod right now because I'm going to be trying to basically bend back almost 3/4 of an inch. That's all the way across, so that's no good. So what we need to do is we need to start actually shaping this into what it needs to be. Okay, so from here we can go ahead and take a router and we can trim off these sides, and when doing so we need to make sure that we are right on the money, pretty much like that, from here to 0, and the same thing from here to 0. And we can always, you know, if it's always better to leave a little bit of wood so you can remove it than take off too much. So what we're going to need to do this is we need something that is going to be our straight edge. And I have some pieces of MDF that I've already cut, and I've already run them over the joiner, so I know that they're flat. I'm just going to go ahead and put a piece of tape down here. This is double stick tape. You can never have enough of it. Here is a template for a fender style neck that I know that the edge right here is straight. Same with this right here. You know, you always run your finger over it. Make sure that it is actually straight. And from 0 to here, that, don't push down on it until it's actually ready. But from 0 to there, okay. That's not going to go anywhere. And we are going to be using a template bit. That's got a bearing right here. This rides against a straight edge. This ends up removing the wood on the side. You'll also notice that this is not a flute. This has actually got a taper to it. Okay, that's going to end up making a much cleaner cut. Now you really only get one shot at this, so make sure that when you are cutting it, you go slow. You don't want to get any chip out or anything. So now we have to do the exact same thing again. The only difference is you don't want to grab and pull this way because of the direction of the router bit. So we're going to be starting here and working our way that way. Now I can take this over to my drum sander, sand these areas, maybe even finish up just the rest of all this just to make it nice and neat. You could also use a belt sander just to make it nice and neat. And then the only thing I really have to focus on is back here and the neck profile. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken this to the drum sander and I've roughed out the sides, got it close to the edge of where it needs to be. This up here, it's a little bit more intricate, so I'm not touching that yet. But I've got this a lot better or more close to what I'm actually looking for. So what we have to do now is we have to do the shaping of the neck. And when shaping a neck like this, you can't just start filing away and hoping you get it right, okay? Because there's what's known as a neck profile. And if we end up taking this right here and we throw it down, there is a particular curve that's here, and then there's one that's here, and it's at a certain depth and all this other stuff. We need to know what that is. And this is a contour gauge. And this is what we're going to end up using. So what we need to do is we need to have a couple of locations. So we can come over here and say, okay, right here at the nut, it looks like there was some glue there, so we're going to ignore that. We just push down on this, okay? And that is our profile. That is our neck profile. So what we can do at this point, let me just make sure that this is actually what we want. And you also want to make sure that it is actually at a right angle, okay? You don't want to do it at an angle like this or this, because if you do, you'll end up getting a bad reading, okay? But this right here is what we want right here. And if we come over here and we do this area, okay, once again, a couple times, that is basically what we want down here, okay? So what you do is, at this point, if you wanted to, you could trace this out and cut these out on a bandsaw or something as a reference piece. And so that way, during the time that you're shaping, you can just keep, you know, putting this down, putting this down, putting this down, and checking to make sure that the contour is correct. But you need some type of reference point, okay? You need some type of reference. And that's what this contour gauge is for. So put this here. That is what my beginning one will be. And now we need to start shaping it. Now there's a few ways that you can shape this. Now if this was a fender neck, we didn't have such a strong back angle on this headstock, I could just run this through one of my routers, because I have special bits that will cut this, and it'll make it consistent, quick, done, easy, okay? In this particular case, I'm not going to really be able to do that because of this heavy back angle. Even if I used a router with one of the large bits, because of the size of the table, I would be able to start here, maybe cut up to about here. I'd only be able to do about 6 inches in this area. So it really wouldn't be beneficial for me to even try that. Okay, so instead, what I can do is I can take something like a wood rasp, something that's very aggressive, and just start shaving it. Okay, I can do something like that to get it started, and then come in with my contour gauge, and from there start using things like a spoke shave, or using my favorite, which is the draw knife. I have shaped and made many necks with this draw knife, and a good one is a little expensive, I'm not going to lie. I think this one was about 70 bucks or something. But you know, these are indispensable. And what we want to do during the time that we are using a draw knife, we have to be very mindful of the grain. Okay, if the grain is, let's say it's going this way, okay, if I take this and I start pulling it, it's going to want to follow that grain, and it's going to start taking out huge chunks, and we don't want that. This side, I can see that the grain is kind of going this direction. That's no good. So because if I start pulling it this way, it's going to get caught up inside that grain. So on that side, I don't have a choice but to come in this way, opposing the grain. But on this side, I need to come in this direction. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp this down best I can anyway, and start using the draw knife on this to take away some of the material. I'm trying to do this in a way that you can see pretty well, but essentially I'm going to come in with the draw knife, and I'm going to just start shaving and kind of rounding this thing off, being very careful though as not to go too deep, because you have to remember the thickness of this. We only gave it just a hair more than what it needed, than the actual thickness of the neck. Okay, so what that basically means is up here at the highest point, I need to be very careful and not take too much off. This is all about taking things off from the side and beginning that rounding of the neck profile. Okay, so this is, once again, like I said, this is rough. So on this side, you saw that I was pulling it this direction. Okay, and I was getting some pretty good shavings. On this side, I have to be a little careful because of the direction of the grain. The way that the grain is on this side is a little different. So I can't really be as aggressive, because if I'm a little bit more aggressive, I can get chunks taken out and it'll ruin the neck blank, okay? And so you'll see that I'm not just pulling this way, I'm also kind of dragging this down at an angle to help shave this. If at any time you're using a draw knife and it starts feeling dull, you better sharpen it, because you can ruin your neck. You can ruin that piece of wood. And I'm only trying to rough this out. I'm not trying to bring it down all the way, because I'm going to use a sander for that, okay? I know you love my shorts, but those are my working shorts. So at this point I can take my gauge, set it here, and it's saying that the sides need to be taken down a little bit, okay? Do you see the gap that's right here? So it's basically saying these sides need to be taken down a little bit more. When I get close to that, which is about right there, okay, that's pretty close. That's pretty close. I don't want to go much further than that. At that point now I can start focusing on what's up here with the gauge. You know, but we can come in here also with a file if we want to try to shape this, okay? Nothing wrong with this. But that right there is really good. Let me show you. So if I take this and I set it down here, you'll see that it pretty much ends up, there's no gaps, okay? So that's pretty good. We can move on toward the middle now. So I'm going to end up just kind of, that looks really good for what we're doing, okay? It's not 100% accurate, but it's very close, okay? So we know we're on the right track. So now I just have to keep doing this all the way down to basically the base. So we're still in the roughing in stages, and you can see that I've kind of shaved off the back. I used my draw knife once again, but we have to make sure that the thickness of this headstock is correct. So I've taken my calipers and I've basically just kind of went cruising around like this all the way around, and from here I can take a belt sander, sand this flat, and using these lines around the outside as my guide, I can make sure that it stays flat. It'll take off a lot in a short period of time, and it'll be pretty accurate. You can also put a mask on here. You can also use orbital sander. It's just going to take a lot longer, and it's not going to be as flat. So I'm going to be cutting across this. So at this point, I want to use an orbital sander. I wouldn't want to continue using the belt sander to get up in this area, because that would be too dangerous. And when I say dangerous, I mean the likelihood of it eating away at some of the neck here is too great. So now, at this point, what we can do is we can start refining the neck, because we've got the rough curve on it. This back here is going to take a little time for me to round off and try to match what was there existing. But this, for the most part, has been taken care of. And during the time that we're doing it, we also have to be very careful. We have to look down the side of this, right? Make sure that the height of it hasn't changed too dramatically. Keep it all one height. And right here's a little tall. I'm going to be primarily using the edge of my sander here. So you'll see that I'll be holding it kind of like at an angle like this. And the whole time that I'm doing it, I'm just trying to even everything up. If I turn it sideways, if I have it like this, let me see if I can do it on the camera. We have to make sure that this doesn't look like a roller coaster. We've got to make sure all that's even. As we turn it, we have to verify the same thing, because as you turn it, you're going to end up having different planes. So make sure during the time that you are sanding this, you are moving the neck back and forth, constantly making sure that everything is even. That is one of the most important things. So I'm going to continue doing that and try to get this all evened up. I will continue sanding this using a file, trying to get this rounded over in the shape that I need it to be. And then from there, we'll go to the next step. When shaping this portion of the neck, okay, generally what I'll do is I'll come in with the sander and use the edge like this. tie this section to this section. That's how I generally go about doing it. Okay, so still doing the fine tuning now to the neck, and I got some 60 grit here, and I'm kind of holding this in a way that will put a curve on it, and I'm going to be dragging this back and forth in order to make sure that we have a nice even curve and everything is flat and straight. Anywhere that you might feel a flat area, you focus on. And after the neck is shaped, believe it or not, that's when we're going to test the truss rod. You can't really test it while you've got a bunch of wood on there. It's just simply not going to bend. It's not going to work. So you have to wait until you get it to the size that you need it, to the shape that you need it, and then from there you can test it. So everything has been shaped fairly well on the neck, and it's still not quite ready for the final, making it look perfect phase. But before we do that, we need to make sure we can verify a few things to make sure that we're on course here and everything is golden. What I've got here is just a regular straight edge, and by placing it on here, I'm trying to show you here that if you look toward the rear here, it's sticking up a little bit. Okay, if I come down here, it'll stick up a little bit right here. So that's telling us we have a little bit of a back bow, which is fine, because as soon as we end up putting string tension on there, it's going to bring this forward. Okay, but when we put our fretboard on, we want that to be flat. We don't really want this to have a back bow. And let's just say, for instance, here's an old Ibanez fretboard. At this point, I can go ahead and glue my fretboard on here, and interestingly enough, that actually fits quite well. But what I can do is I can put my fretboard on here and start gluing it. And during the time that that's going on, how I'm going to make sure that this stays flat, instead of having that gap right here, I'm hoping that the camera can pick up on that. When I put my fretboard on, and you don't have to have the binding on, you can have the binding on, it doesn't really make a difference, because when you do your fine tuning, when you go through and you do your sanding and scraping and all that other stuff like that with the fine tuning, that's when you can have the binding just go right into that piece of wood really nicely. But what we'd want to do is we don't want to go crazy with this, but what we would do is we would clamp the neck just a little bit like that to the table, and it'll cause it to have a slight forward bow. Okay, but that would end up removing the bow that we have inside here. So let me see if I can do this. That right there is probably enough. But now if I set my ruler there, my straight edge, it pretty much everything just goes away. Okay, and that's essentially how we want our fretboard to go on. We do not want our fretboard to go on a neck that has either a forward bow or a back bow. Okay, if it has a very, 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 very slight forward bow, a lot of times you can get away with that because the truss rod will take care of it. If it has a very, very, very slight back bow, a lot of times the string tension will take care of that. But you don't really want to plan on that. Don't bet on that. Okay, it's always better to make sure that your neck is actually pretty straight. One more thing you need to do, okay, before you go ahead and glue that fretboard on, you need to make sure that that truss rod works. Okay, and as long as this section right here is a little bit less, and when I say a little bit less, 1/16, you don't want to go an 1/8, that would be too much. A 16, 3/16 tops, depending on the thickness of the neck. You know, if it curves down and then it comes back up this way, and then you have the piece of wood that also curves with that, and it puts a curve in that rod. When you tighten this, it's going to want to straighten that rod out, which will give this a back bow. Okay, so we have just a little bit of a back bow right now because of just the way that the wood is. So right now, let's go ahead and put a little bit of tension on the neck and see if we increase the back bow at all. And if we increase the back bow, that means our truss rod is working. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this here. And yeah, it's increased quite a bit. If I push this here, this is raised up a decent amount compared to what it was. Okay, so our truss rod is working, and it will work even better after the fretboard is on and this has been flattened. Okay, it'll work even better. Do not over clamp this. Do not try to put too much of a bend in here. Right now, if this had a huge back angle, you might want to look at your truss rod and see what the hell's going on, or look at the wood and see what's going on. Trying to force a piece of wood that has natural internal tension that's going to constantly want to pull it back, that could be a bad thing. That could be a bad sign that that piece of wood really wasn't dry enough. That's the first thing. Second thing is it tells you might want to actually put a slight forward bow in that neck when you're gluing that fretboard on there to kind of overcome some of that internal tension. Okay, so that's just something you got to kind of keep in mind here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to glue my fretboard on here. As soon as the fretboard is glued on, we can basically go to the next step, which there's really not too many steps at this point after the gluing of the fretboard, because this gets into just basically building like a regular neck. And in my guitar building course, I go over how to build necks. Okay, but I don't go over blueprinting existing necks to make them where they're identical to what was there beforehand. I only go over making your own type of neck. But it's really the same thing as far as applying a fretboard. So I'm going to be using regular wood glue. Everything's the same. Going to be applying my fretboard, clamping it on there, and it is the original vintage fretboard I'm putting on. And as soon as that's done and it's dry, we'll go to the next step. When gluing your fretboard, make sure that you don't use too little glue and make sure you don't use too much glue. If the fretboard is a very oily fretboard, make sure that you end up taking some acetone to the rear of it to remove some of that oil before you try to apply it to your neck, because if not, it might not stick. Okay? You'll also want to make sure that there is no residual glue from the last time that you glued something. Make sure you remove any old glue or anything on there, because wood glue does not like to stick to wood glue. Okay? A lot of times when we get into projects like this, we get all excited and we start working too fast and not thinking about what we're actually doing. And you miss a step like not removing the glue, you're going to regret it. Making sure that this is sitting exactly where it needs to be. But now I have to get out my sanding blocks and I have to use them to clamp this down. Any areas that you see where a bunch of glue is sticking out, go ahead and remove it now if you can. It'll make your job a little bit easier when it's time to put binding on or whatever else you're planning on doing with it. Now another one of the reasons why we don't really want to have everything fine-tuned yet is because we want to make sure that if during the time that we're clamping this down, if it were to accidentally slightly dent the rear, it gives us a little room for sanding and or steaming the dent out. Okay, so that's why it's kind of like you want a lot of this stuff that could potentially damage the guitar neck done before you do all the fine tuning. And we can give that about an hour, and it should be set up enough that we can remove the clamps. Probably wouldn't want to try to use the truss rod or do anything like that for at least a full day just to make sure everything has been cured, but it should be close enough. in about an hour for us to remove that, and we can make sure that everything's cleaned up, looking nice, put our binding on or whatever else we're going to be planning on doing, and then we can fine tune. So putting on the binding is pretty much the same way as I do it all the time. It's you take some acetone, and this works for ABS binding. Sometimes they have binding that you can't really use acetone, but most of the time this works. You just run acetone down the rear of it, okay, and just within seconds that binding is going to end up becoming, I don't want to say mushy, but it's going to become, it's going to be like a liquid plastic. And when that happens, you only have a few seconds to attach it where you want to attach it. And then you can just use regular tape. They have, when I say regular tape, masking tape. Okay, they do have special binding tape. I find you don't really need it. I've never needed it. Okay, but essentially, put a good dose of the acetone on there. Then give it a little bit of a tug here. There's an area that the tape's just not going to really work for you. You can just put some type of clamp there. And it doesn't really take long for all of this to set up. I mean, where I started next to the nut is pretty much already done, and I just did that no more than a few minutes ago. Moving right along. So we've got the binding on. I'm still working on the binding as far as scraping it with a razor to have it match, blend in to the neck profile. We've got it on both sides, obviously. And the neck profile at this point really is pretty much there. Okay, and I'm now at this point I'm using 220 grit to go through, fine tune, fine sand everything. Okay, we're pretty much there. We're pretty much done. Okay, now there is one more thing I need to do, and that is I need to drill the holes out here. And you know, if you have a pattern already, or like if you have like a headstock or something that's been broken, you already have the locations of the holes here. Okay, you want to use what's known as a brad point, a brad tip. Okay, and this is probably the wrong size. Yeah, it is. Well, maybe. And what you want to do is you definitely do not want to use the typical drill bit that you would use for metal and you find everywhere. You definitely want to use something like this. If you go in through the top, which there's nothing wrong with that, you need to make sure that the headstock is actually flat against something like this when you're going through. And when you're pushing this through, it's going to want to do some splitting and chipping back here. Okay, the pressure, it's not going to want to cut it, it's going to end up wanting to push through. So to avoid that, you need to put a piece of wood back here, a sacrificial piece of wood, to prevent that. And what I generally will do is put a piece of double stick tape and then just take a sacrificial piece of wood that's fairly flat. I mean, if it's curved, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. I had ordered a new veneer for this that I can glue on top of it. It will have the holes already in the correct locations. After that gets glued on there, I'm going to use that as a pattern. Okay, now if you wanted to just call this good, at this point you would go ahead, cut this portion out, sand it. You'd hit this with primer, right? You know, tape this off, sand everything exactly like you want it, tape everything off, hit it with primer, and then after you're done hitting it with primer, then you would hit it with your black. Generally for a headstock like this would be black, and then you know your inlays up there, depending on what inlay you wanted to put. Sometimes, you know, inlay right here as well. That portion has to wait. The painting has to wait. The drilling of these has to wait for this. But I think you understand how to drill. I mean, it's pretty much a no-brainer. Use a brad tip. Make sure you've got some backing behind it, and be very conscientious about exactly where you are drilling. Okay, you only get one shot at it. But with that being said, I have to do a little bit of fretboard work. I have to do a little bit of fret leveling and buffing and polishing. I'm going to have to work on the binding just a little bit more to make it exactly like I want it. But essentially, okay, essentially, this is how you go about doing a copy of a neck. Okay, essentially this is how you go about doing it. As long as you're using tools like the gauges and things like that that I was showing, you're going to be fine, because you just need to make sure that you can keep going back and forth, measuring. That's essentially what you're doing, measuring, 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 measuring. And then after everything is said and done, you have to go by the feel. Does it feel right? You know? And this actually feels really good. It does feel right. This section right here, this gets worked on a little bit more right before it gets set into the guitar. Okay, right before this gets ready to get set is when all of this starts getting kind of cleaned up and stuff, and I keep doing test fits. Now I've already got this where it goes in snug, okay, but it's not absolutely perfect yet, but it's really close. And I'm not going to do this little section, which essentially I'm going to be using a file for it. Okay, I'm not going to be doing this section until it's time to glue it in. Okay, but that, guys, is that. And you know, if you can build a Gibson style neck like this, you'll have no problem building a Fender neck or an Ibanez neck or anything like that. You just have to look at how it's made, look at the direction of the grain, make sure you know what kind of wood is being used, get all of your angles right, get all of your measurements right, make sure you get all of your contours right. Take your time, do a lot of test fits. It's always better if you actually have the original neck or if you have the original guitar body, that you can keep testing and testing until it actually fits and it feels right, it looks right, it sits right. Now, believe it or not, you can actually make copies from photographs. Okay, if you have enough reference shots, you can make copies. But that is the end of this video, everyone, and hopefully you enjoyed watching this and you learned something from it. It's always better to use templates. After you get all your measurements done, make accurate templates. It's always better. If you're going to be making a lot of them, it's always a good idea to have templates. If you do have to route something out by hand, like I showed you with the truss rod, which I didn't have to do, but I did that really just to show you that it was possible, and it's really not ideal, but it can work. If you do that, you always do it in small increments. Okay. Anytime that you can allow a jig, a machine, a pattern, something to help you make something more accurate, by all means do it. Doing things by hand, you're increasing the chances of error. Everything on this was done by hand with no templates or anything, and the only time that I used anything to help me was really the piece of wood to make sure that this right here was straight on both sides. Everything else was just done by measurements. So it's possible, guys. It is definitely possible. But I'm going to continue working on this, some 220, get it down to where I need it. When the new veneer comes in, I can attach that, drill out my holes, and clear coat it. And if you want to learn about clear coating, that's in my guitar building course with finishes and dyes and buffing and all that other stuff. But that is that. And until next time, everyone, take care.